Hello, everybody. Good evening, or I guess I don't know where everyone is, so maybe good afternoon. Where I am, it is evening because I'm in New York City. My name is Jessica Winston, and I am the naturalist instructor at a school called Beginnings Nursery School. And so I'm going to be sharing a presentation with you. I'm going to get my screen going so you can see my PowerPoint. One second. Here we go. Okay. So this is shared spaces connecting children to the natural world and each other. And I'm going to make this get a little smaller so that I can see things. So like Emily was saying, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat. I love, people picking my brain, and we can dive more deeply into some things if you're interested. But I'm going to jump right in to my presentation. And I thought I would include this as my first picture because I feel like it kind of encapsulates the kind of experience that we have with naturalist programs here in New York City, where you're kind of in these rugged outdoor or, potentially more urban park spaces and surrounded by towering skyscrapers and the hustle and bustle of New York City. So this is my first little shot here. But where is the little arrow? There it is. Okay. So, but my history started in New Jersey. I was born and spent my childhood in the woods in northern Jersey. And, it's funny, I wanted to share a picture of me because I spent my entire childhood basically outside in the woods, and I wanted to find a picture of me doing that. But I guess, because being outside in the woods is such an independent activity, there were no pictures of me I discovered actually outside in the woods. The only one I could find was this one of me that's not very good here in the tree fort that we had built. And my sister standing above me, who you can't even really see because she's in the leaves there. But really, my whole childhood was pretty much spent outside. And I certainly actually did not envision myself ending up here in New York City, but your life takes twists and turns. And I found myself here in the heart of New York City when I was an adult. And I had started off here as a photographer, but decided that I really wanted to be doing something else. And so I became a preschool teacher in 2006. And had been already working with a lot of natural materials just because of my own background and my own interest in my classroom with my students, and had started to try and bring them outside more and more because I was just finding that the children that I was working with were just, not only not connected to, nature and to being outside, and they just weren't comfortable being outside, some of them. And having experiences with people who were like terrified of ants and parents that were scared of letting their children play with sticks really led us to start a naturalist program at the school in 2017, because fortunately the year before, my boss had an opportunity to go and visit some schools in Sweden. Well, we all had an opportunity to go visit some schools in Sweden and in Finland. And when she saw the outdoor programs that they were doing there, and she knew that myself and another teacher were really doing a lot of outdoor work with our classes already anyway, she wanted to get our school, like everyone involved in having a naturalist program in their classroom. So prior to COVID, we were getting everyone outside. We have about 8-9 classes at the school out once a month, just because logistically it can be challenging to get everyone outdoors weekly. But last year, because of COVID and, like many programs that took to going outside more frequently because it was just a safer place to be, we started going out once a week. So we did a lot more last year. It was an incredibly awesome experience for the students, for myself. But this year, because things are going hopefully back to a little bit more normal, we've gone back to the once a month. But we go to visit a number of different parks here in New York City. Stuyvesant Square Park, which is a little bit smaller, Central Park, which is obviously huge and a blessing to have, Prospect Park, sometimes over on the west side, the Hudson River Park. So, but we go to a lot of different parks around the New York City area. And it's interesting because, you know, when I first moved to New York City myself, you know, having spent so much time outside, people would be like, oh, Jessica, you must spend a lot of time in the parks in New York City. And originally I was kind of like, well, actually, no, I don't. I used to spend most of my time trying to get out of New York City when I had free time so that I could get to what I thought of as more like natural spaces, more pristine spaces where, you know, I could really enjoy quote unquote nature. And it was really my students that got me going into the parks in New York because, you know, it was the space that I could bring them to. And now I've really grown to love them because, you know, not only can you have really, really rich natural experiences in the parks because they provide so much, but, you know, those same kind of experiences that you get to have in nature, no matter where you are, that, you know, bring the children such a sense of independence and self-confidence, really carry out into them have, you know, building their school community and strengthening their classroom community. And then it extends outward because you're having these experiences in these spaces that are within your local community. For example, you know, these are some students that at the end of last year decided they wanted to make like thank you pictures and thank you notes to the park service that takes care of the parks, because they were watching them during the year, you know, taking care of the parks, trimming the trees and different things. And they wanted to say thank you for taking care of these spaces so that they could enjoy them during the school year. So, you know, it cues them into their local community. And then all of those, I think what I've grown to really love about, you know, the public and urban spaces is that then you have all these layers on top of each other, you know, the natural experiences, your classroom experiences, then those community experiences, interacting with individuals within the community. And it really lends itself to having children grow up with this sense of respect and responsibility for, then again, all those different layers, you know, the layer of nature, the layer of, you know, their classroom, the layer of that bigger human community. So they really become like citizens. I think of them as like citizens of the world or citizens of the earth, where they just have a respect for all of that. And they can really see themselves within that huge world and every, you know, all the parts of it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, the things that I see that are similar about working in an urban space or like a shared space, you know, maybe within a town or within a city, and then talk about maybe some differences, you know, between that and working in, let's say, like a more wild space or a private space or somewhere where maybe you're not necessarily needing to interact with other people as much. Because, you know, I have gone to visit natural programs where people have their own space that they work in, or they maybe work in someone's yard, or they have like a more private space. And there are real benefits to that, you know, in a lot of ways. I think sometimes people think they wish they had their own space to be able to have a naturalist program. And people will actually ask me and they'll be like, oh, you're running this in New York City where, you know, there are just so many people around and it's not, like, how do you do that? Like, they're actually, you know, kind of confused sometimes, like how you can be running something like that in the parks here in New York City. But so anyway, I'll talk a little bit about like similar experiences that I think people have in both of those kinds of worlds, and then some differences. So, oh, let me quick go back to this one. So, you know, hopefully in both spaces, you can be having fun playing in like puddles and, you know, getting an opportunity to find some good sticks to play with or to collect, find some natural materials or things to examine or to collect as well. Yep, sometimes the 4 button works and sometimes it doesn't. Oh, there it goes. Hopefully you can find, you know, a good tree to form a relationship with or to climb, maybe some leaves to play in the fall, or some critters to examine or to see. And hopefully you can find some good clean dirt that can be a little bit of a challenge sometimes, I think, in an urban setting, finding some dirt that you don't have to worry about finding little bits of broken glass. But, hopefully the kids are having those kinds of experiences outdoors, no matter where they are. And, doesn't matter if you're urban or wherever you are, kids are getting a chance to go out in different types of weather, different seasons. They're getting to experience going out in the rain, going out in the snow, spring, fall, winter, all of those things. And again, all of those things help to build the kids. They take calculated risks while they're out there, and they're building their independence and their confidence while they're having all of these experiences outside. And I really feel like that happens more when you're outdoors than in the classroom, because again, it just, there's less teacher watching, and they take risks in a way that I feel like they don't always feel comfortable in a classroom setting. And then all of those things that are happening outside, you're experiencing them together. So it helps to strengthen your community, your classroom community. So, but then what are the other layers of learning that happen when you're in a shared space? What does a shared space provide? What's a little bit different when you're doing things in an urban or a town kind of public park settings? And there are a lot of different types of public spaces or, shared spaces. There can be state and national parks where you might be running a program, or maybe a rural or community park, or maybe an urban park like I'm doing here in the city. And, for the rest of the presentation, I also thought it might be interesting and important for us to be thinking about what does a shared space say about its community? I've been thinking about that a lot lately. When you're in a space, it can tell you, the kids are picking up on it. It tells you a lot about the community that space is in. It can tell you about the size of the population. You can see that in this picture here, this is a park that my children sometimes play in when we're in upstate New York. And very often we are the only people that are there, so they are obviously understanding that this is a space that, not many people are going to, and it's for, a small community. I can tell you about the demographics of the population that this space is in, who has access to this space, who doesn't have access to this space, because you're seeing who's there and who's not. It gives you an idea about the socioeconomic background of the people who are, who have this space to be in, and what their values are. So I just think it's interesting to think about that when you're in a space. And for the rest of, my presentation this evening, obviously I will be focused on public parks here in New York City, because that's where I'm located and that's where I'm running my program from. And again, I have a lot of people who say to me, like, how do you do this in New York City? And yeah, there are challenges, to doing this in a public space, in a city or in any kind of public space. Sometimes you show up and there are people in your space, the area that you were planning to go to can be closed unexpectedly. Sometimes there is an event occurring unexpectedly, like you show up in an area that you were going to play in and they're cutting the lawn, or someone's holding a wedding there, or you never know what's going to be happening. Obviously, since it's not your space, you can't work on a project and leave it there. Sometimes, an area might not seem as naturally pristine. They can be challenging to get to. You get sometimes people's opinions while you're out with your group of students. Like, I will very often have people come up to me that are kind of aghast that I'm letting students play with sticks, and they'll be like, I just want you to know, I'm a little worried because I see you're letting these children play with sticks and they might hurt themselves with them. So you get experiences like that where people want to tell you about their opinions, but it's also good at learning opportunity for them. You have to be thinking about the materials that you're using while you're in those spaces. I mean, you need to be doing that obviously anywhere when you're working outside, but obviously in Central Park and different parks, you can't be using anything like paints or things that are going to be damaging the landscape. You can't, we were actually, just before I started doing this presentation, we were talking about how, you have to be thinking about the weather. And when I go to visit people who I guess have their own more private spaces, they, are always showing these beautiful fire pits that they have for children to gather around when it's cold, or, they have these like wooden structures or tents or different things made out of branches that they can go under when they're, hit with inclement weather. And when you're working in a public park, you can't have a fire pit. They definitely don't want me doing that in the middle of Central Park. So, that's something you can't do. You have to keep everything lightweight because you're walking in with everything that you're going to need, and the kids are going to be walking in with stuff. I mean, you can't do whatever you want in any space, but you certainly can't do whatever you want. And there can be unexpected dangers or inappropriate occurrences, like other grown-ups doing things that you don't want your children to be watching or experiencing. And especially last year, but always there's kind of this, you have to be aware of the other people that are in the space while you're there and making sure that you're taking care of them. Like last year, making sure that we were keeping our distance from everybody. So there are a lot of things that you can be thinking about as potential challenges. And I think that sometimes when I talk to people, they're a little leery of the idea of doing, again, a program like this in a city park. But what I always say is all these things that can be potentially challenges are also benefits. All of these things are also benefits because, I mean, one of the main things is it leads to a tremendous amount of flexibility. You have to be so flexible when you're going into a shared space. And the children learn that, they learn that they have to be flexible. Very often, especially last year, because so many people were running programs in outdoor spaces, like we would just run into other groups of kids. And it was like, this particular time of year, the cherry blossoms came out, everyone wanted to be by the cherry blossoms. So it was like, okay, we can't go to that cherry blossom set because there are already people there and there's COVID and we're trying to stay away from each other. So, you had to go to a different spot. And so we saw, or, you'd have to be flexible because your favorite mushroom tree that you loved poking at the mushrooms that would be growing on it all the time, like in the picture on the left, would show up the next day and it would be cut down by the Park Service. But instead you'd be learning about why you thought it was maybe cut down, because you'd find there was a big crack in the middle of its base and that maybe it was a little rotted and you could count the rings in the tree instead. So again, flexibility and getting a new experience. Or you, on the last day of school, wanted to go say goodbye to the turtles that you loved at the turtle park, but there were also at the same time a tremendous amount of birds that were migrating, and there were huge birding groups that were in the space that you wanted to be in because they were bird watching, because there were all these warblers and stuff. So again, we found a new space that we hadn't visited before, which actually ended up being even better and more awesome than the space that we had been going to. And we got to meet the bird watchers, from a distance safely and talk to them and find out why they were there. And when it comes to the weather, we got an opportunity. The kids really, kids are fine with the weather. We were saying before the presentation, it's really the grownups that have trouble with the weather. But everyone learns to dress for the weather and dress appropriately, to wear their raincoats, wear warm clothes when it's cold out. Even though we didn't have fire pits and we didn't have shelters, we found make-do shelters, like that's us in the bottom right-hand corner there. Just finding one of the overpasses, a bridge overpass, to find a little spot in the rain to have our lunch one day, or we'd find a thicket, like in the picture there on the left. And we could have pretend fire pits. I thought I would include that picture on the top right. That's the kids having a campfire where they were making s'mores, even though obviously not a real fire. And, you get to be inventive with the materials that you're using outside. And it really cues you into the seasons and the weather and what's going on in the environment that you're in when you're using the materials that you're finding outside, obviously. For example, the picture all the way to the left it was a day that it was raining really hard. And so we used the rainwater that was gathering around the roots of that elm tree to paint on the bark of the tree. Sorry, I'm talking so much. I'm going to get a little bit of a cough here. 1 second. Or in the springtime when it got really muddy and we started using the mud to be able to attach things to rocks or to stick onto trees. Sorry, I had a little bit of a cold last week, and while I'm better, I still have been occasionally getting a cough. Especially when I'm speaking a lot. So I'm sorry about that. Hopefully I won't have a very big coughing fit. Okay. And again, cueing us into the seasons. This is actually one of my favorite activities to do with kids is in the fall, because again, you're not trying to bring materials out that will damage things. And the leaves are so abundant. I love to bring out scissors and hole punchers so we can punch the leaves that are already down on the ground. Since I know that the Parks Department is going to mow the lawn anyway, I will also let the kids cut the grass. And I love these activities to do with kids because you're building their fine motor skills. So sneaky. They don't realize they're building their fine motor skills. They think they're just having fun cutting grass and making holes in leaves, but you're building their fine motor skills using those tools. And again, because you can't use things that are permanent, you're inventing things. These students really wanted to glue these branches back onto this tree. And I was like, well, we can't use glue. And so then they actually found that they could take the little crevices in the bark there, and they were finding ways to kind of put them in, slide them into the crevices so that they would stick back onto the tree there. And again, talking about the community, last year, even though we weren't getting an opportunity to interact with other classes, because again, COVID, we were trying to keep our distance for everyone, we learned that there were other children at the park having similar experiences to us. And we knew that because we would come to a space and very often find things that, indicated that other classes had been there. One morning we came to this one space and we found on the left that, somebody had taken a couple of logs and sort of placed a few of them around on these rocks. And this one little boy, Ryan, got the idea that he really wanted to make a bridge. So he collected up some more sticks and put them across. And that's the picture on the right there, that he made a bridge. And then after he made the bridge, some of the other kids in the class got the idea that they wanted to find even more sticks. And so we built this fort that's over here on the left. But what I loved about this so much was that they didn't even realize we ended up having basically like interconnected classroom, like from different schools, project that kind of changed over time, where like over a period of a month, we had gathered all these sticks, we made this fort, and then we would show up the next day or, a couple of days later, and another class had obviously taken those sticks and moved them to a different spot and, had set up something different. And then we would take them down and move them and do something different with them. So it was actually a lot of fun to kind of do that, have that experience with a different school or a different set of children. And, during this whole time that we were kind of not really connected to one another. What you can also be learning in an urban or a shared space is that, you're not only getting the geological history and the natural history from that space. Like this is pictures of the infamous Manhattan schist, which is the metamorphic rock that, you see a lot of the rocks in Central Park are made up of that. And, then the park was carved out by the glaciers. And it left out some boulders and things like that when they were receding. So this group of students was constantly trying to push this boulder. And, when they turned 4, they were like, well, I think that now that we're 4, we might be able to move it. And we tried all year, but they did not. get an opportunity to move that boulder. It was way too heavy. They also would notice that another class had used paint and left a mark there, and they would ask questions about that, like why did they use paint and leave a permanent mark on a rock? And then you learn about, again, the human history of a space. So that kind of layered, again, the natural learning along with the history of humans in a space. This is a plaque that was about Seneca Village, which was in Central Park. There was an African-American community that had kind of like a small community or town almost there in Central Park, that when they were building the park, they unfortunately removed its citizens, which is why now I guess they've been trying to kind of rectify that by putting at least information about that its existence. But so the kids had really wanted to learn about it. And then as we were exploring, throughout our time there, we would find things like subway entrance, subway areas and stuff like that in the park. And the kids were convinced that they were part of, they were remnants of Seneca Village. So that's what the picture is there on the right. And then you could, in our city, you could also go and visit the reservoir, but people can be thinking about, the places that they're working in. What is the natural history? What's the history of this space? So this is the reservoir, and, to tell the kids that this was once the water source for all of the city's residents, where obviously now we've got millions of people here. So this would not be enough now, but, there was a time where it was. And then the children get a chance to see, like I was saying earlier, the people who care for the park. They watch them cut down trees that have fallen during storms and, prune branches and things like that. So they get to learn a little bit about that, the people who care about the space and interact with them. And then they always want to know why people do not put their garbage in the garbage cans, because obviously, unfortunately, they inevitably see garbage in the park. These are pictures of just cans and bottles and disgusting things floating in the water or in the grass or in the different spaces in our urban parks. And, the kids are always very dumbfounded. They're like, well, why don't people just put these things in the garbage? And it provides an opportunity for us to talk about, how some people are not responsible. They don't take care of these spaces. In the picture on the left there, the student is asking, when you're reading that, it says that the water's, basically not clean and that you shouldn't go in it. And they're trying to understand why the water is not clean. And they also wonder, well, if it's not clean for us, then it isn't clean for the fish. Is it clean for the turtles? And they're concerned about the animals that have to live in these spaces. When they find the garbage in the water, they're always like, well, what if the ducks eat it? That's not going to be good for them. It'll make their stomachs upset. So it just really provides an opportunity for you to have discussions about that and caring about your environment. And sometimes in other classes, obviously we've made posters and different things telling people that they shouldn't do things like that. But, it starts with teaching them how to care for a space. One of the few kind of more traditional materials that I will sometimes let students use in the park is string. And, but we always have to clean it up when we're done using it. This picture here is some students were concerned because they found like a little cut in the bark on one of the trees and they wanted to make a bandage for it. So they wrapped tons and tons and tons of yarn around it. And then as they were cutting it off, they got so into the cutting, they started making like teeny, tiny pieces of yarn. And I was like, well, we are going to have to clean all those up. I don't know if you want to make such tiny pieces. They were, still wanted to do it. But I was like, all right, we're going to have to clean up all these tiny pieces. And they did. They worked. It took them like half an hour, but they cleaned all the little pieces of yarn up. But again, I think it's really important for them to realize, like, just like the classroom, we have to clean up outside too. We can't leave our mess here. And hopefully that transfers into all of their experiences outside, that when they go to the beach, when they go anywhere, they'll realize like, we have to clean up after ourselves, and hopefully even larger, that they shouldn't make a mess of things in the first place. You obviously have to share the spaces, just like we have to share toys in the classroom. We have to share spaces. This is again, when the leaves and the flowers came out in the spring, it was like the park just was so filled. And we had found this gorgeous tree that was like perfect for climbing. So we were out in it and we were playing in it. And then after we had been there for about an hour, hour and a half, you could see that another group, I guess that was their regular space that they spent time in. So they started coming over towards us. And, I was like, okay, we've been here for a while. Why don't we let them use it for a bit? And then they did for a while. And then we came back over to it when they left. But I think it's important for the kids to realize that we have to share these spaces because they're not just ours. And here we are on some lava rocks, which we had to share a lot because a lot of kids like to play lava. And this was a space where people like to have picnics and all kinds of things. And we had to be mindful of the other people in these spaces. And again, I think it transcends into not just about sharing with humans. This was an experience where one day we came and we happened to find 2 cattails that had broken, and they were on the ground just in the field nearby a bunch of other cattails. And so the kids, I let them have this opportunity to they went crazy, just kind of smashing them against this large boulder, and it created all this fluff and snow, as they called it. And they had such a good time. But we came to this space regularly, and the next week they were like, oh, we had such fun. Can we do that again? And it was like, well, actually, no, we can't, because, last time we came and we found those cattails and they happened to be broken. But, they were like, well, pointing to the other ones, like, well, why can't we just take those ones down? And I'm like, well, the birds use those for food and other people like to look at them. So we can't just be taking all these cattails down and using them because we think that they're fun. And the kids really understood it. After a while, they started to really understand that not only do we have to worry about not taking these things down so other people can't see them, but there are things that animals rely on for food too, or for shelter. Similarly here, we had a group of students that became really fascinated with this tree stump. And in it, we discovered one time there was a little broken piece of wood, and we found these grubs, these wood-boring beetle grubs inside of it. And they wanted, like I just said with the last group, wanted to come the next time and tear another piece of wood off. And again, over time, we made them understand similarly that, we couldn't just tear this whole stump apart because we'd be destroying the home of these creatures that lived inside, and then they wouldn't be able to live anymore. And and then this was us kind of what I think this was kind of the experience that made me want to do this presentation, because I think that this image here on the right kind of gets across, like, is the moment of like everything I'm trying to get across with students when I'm outside in the park. These boys were climbing in this tree and they were like, this is our tree. You can't climb in it, they were saying to some other kids. And, the other kids obviously were like, well, of course we can climb in this tree. And I walked over and I was like, well, of course, this tree is not just yours. And the other class, members of the class can climb in it too. And then I said to them, I was like, well, but actually, who else have we seen in this park? We see people from all over the world in this park. And they were kind of like, yeah, we do. We see people from all over the world. They come to Central Park. And I was like, so really, anybody in the entire world, right, can come and climb in this tree. They have a right to do that, right? And they were kind of like looking at me like with this astonished look, like, oh yeah, you're right. So like anyone can climb in this tree. And then trying to cue them in even further to be like, and, we have to be thinking about this tree. Like, I'm trying to get the kids to think about also the organisms as their own beings and their own selves, and that they have rights too. Similarly, the picture on the left, I had another little student that was like, these are my flowers and no one else can come over here by them. And trying to make him understand that they're not his flowers. They're here in this space, that everyone has a right to being in this space. So does he. But that these flowers are their own living being, and that they have a right to be alive, and that they have a right to be in this space too. And they're not owned by anybody. I think it's easier for kids to kind of grasp the idea of people being also allowed into spaces. And I think that I just kind of begin to get them to understand this idea that these living organisms are their own selves and have their own rights to be in spaces. But I think it's really important to start that when they're young so that they get that idea. And just again, to be thinking about the bigger community. Oh goodness, before I end, I got to end quickly. Okay. Some experiences that we had with other just people within our community. Because again, you're in these public spaces and you meet people from your community. The picture on the left is us talking to, I couldn't include them because I don't know who the person is. I couldn't get rights to use their picture in this image, but talking to a volunteer in the parks about what they were doing and how they were planting native plants there in that space. Or again, thinking about your community, like the picture on the right is us not being able to go to a particular set of rocks that we really wanted to climb on because, unfortunately, there are very often people that are homeless sleeping in the parks, and students have a lot of questions about that. But it provides an opportunity for us to be talking about that, how there are homeless people in our community and, why that might happen and how can we care for those people? How can we help those people? But again, just bringing the kids into that awareness of that larger community that we're a part of. And so I thought I would actually just kind of end because my head is kind of in this space now of community and natural spaces or green spaces and who has access to them. And I want to start bringing that more to even the students' attention because especially where I'm coming from here in New York City, the equity in terms of, or lack of equity between the different types of spaces that people have access to is so glaring that I think it's actually important to bring that to students' attention. So I'm trying this year and hopefully in years to come to bring that to children's attention so that they can be thinking about that and why that is. Because, for example, the picture on the left on the top here is the newly built little island here in New York City, which is obviously I'm sure they spent a ton of money building that thing, and it's elaborate and it's well kept and it's, super clean. And then on the east side, it's completely different. This is the Lower East Side on the top right. And you can't even find a garbage can half the time over there. So people just throw their garbage on the ground. Or the park that's on the lower hand left side where you have to basically have a key and live in that community to be able to access that park. So it's obviously pretty exclusive. Or on the lower right, where again, on the Lower East Side, even when there are sometimes grass spaces or green spaces, people don't even have access to them because they're told that they can't go on those grassy spaces. So I don't know. I'm thinking a lot about that lack of equity in terms of our green and natural spaces in urban and town settings. And I think it's important again to bring that to our own attention and to our students' attention as well. But I'm seeing that I think I've nailed my time on this because we are pretty much done, right, Emily?
Yeah, you are right on time.